In this video, we're going to bring together a SQLAlchemy database and our Flask web interface and use a form to load up data into a table, to add records to a table. So we are starting, so I've separated out various files here. You see, I've got my VENV, my virtual environment, sort of activated and ready to go. We move into the virtual directory. And so I have a definition file, a population file, a routes file, a forms file. Okay. And then I have some other Python files in this directory right now, but they have nothing to do with this project. Okay, so in the first file, I am defining the database. So I am just saying, here are the tables I'm going to have. And so let's have a look at that. So I have create engine, declarative base, column, integer, string, foreign key. So I'm going to have, this is my painter's painting database. So I will have the primary keys will be integers, the names and the countries and so on, and titles of paintings, those will be strings. Then the painting will have a foreign key, which will be a point to the primary key of the painter who painted that painting. And I also will have a relationship. I don't think I use session. The session is going to be used when I populate the database or insert things in the database or query the database. So I don't think it's really used here. Here's where I'm going to call this database art. When it's created, I had created it but deleted it. So right now it doesn't exist as a stored file, and this file defines it, but does not sort of actually generate it, because the definition file is going to be called by Populate, which is going to establish the sessions and create the database and put things in it. But we have our basic idea of, we have the classes, SQLAlchemy classes to make basically entities which have corresponding tables. And so I'm making a painter entity, which has a corresponding painters table. It has an ID, which is an integer in the primary key. I'm going to auto increment. The artists, the painters, have last names and first names and countries and birth dates and death dates, and they have a relationship to painting. I have a painting class. It has a corresponding table, paintings. It also has an ID, which is integer in the primary key, and I'll auto increment. The painting has a title. The painting has a file name. And then it has an painter ID, which is a foreign key pointing back to the painter's table, and specifically the ID field, the ID column within the painter's table. Okay, but this is just the defining. I don't do anything with the data. I don't put data in. I don't query the data. I don't insert data. I just define the data in this file. In the first file, I actually sort of run, and then this one imports the other one. So is populate. So I'm going to have a data file that is going to put data into both tables, including the relationship. So this is coming from I have static, I have data, I have this JSON file. Let me format it a little more nicely. So I have a sort of a dictionary, if I'm using Python language, with the property painters, which then is a list of other dictionaries. And then properties include, this is a painter's dictionary, one of the painters, a painter dictionary, which has last name, first name, country icon, country name, birth date, death date, and paintings. And paintings is a further list, a list within the list. and then it has dictionaries for each painting, and that has title and file names. Okay. So that's what I'm reading to create. So Populate, I am setting up a session. So I'm actually going to put data into the database. So I have to establish a session. I'm bringing in my definition of the database so I know what it is I'm making. And I'm establishing a session. And I'm connecting to this file, making sure I know where it is, and then grabbing it. And it is, so I'm using my operating system to make sure I know where my Python is. And then this is relative to where the Python is, where the JSON is. So it's in a static folder, data folder, and then there's the JSON file. And I load up it, and I'm calling it art. I am looping over the artists. I borrowed this loop from a previous example, and so I, in that file, I was enumerating. There's no reason for me to enumerate here, but it was just a vestige of what I had done before. So, but I am looping over the painters list of art, and I'm making a painter with the first name and the last name. So this is basically the constructor of the class. So setting up the first name, the last name, the country name, the birth date, the death date. I'm not doing the ID because it's integer, and I'm auto incrementing. I'm adding it and then flushing it. So flush is short of a commit, but will make the painter ID available for what comes next. And this is a nested loop over the paintings of that painter. And again, I'm enumerating, so that's a little bit overkill. This art painter's I just could have been artist, but I'm going over the particular artist's paintings, looping over them, using my MyDB. That's when I imported the definition file, I called it my underscore DB, my database. And so then I'm using my DB and then the painting class that belongs to my D, and this is the constructor I'm using the title and the file name to construct a painting. Then I'm assigning that painting to a painter ID of the particular painter I'm dealing with. So that's why I flushed, so that ID would be generated and I'd have access to it. And then I'm doing a session add, which is basically corresponds to a SQL insert. So I'm inserting a painting. Finally, when I'm done this sort of whole nested loop, I'm committing. And I'm doing some queries on the painter, the second painter, and showing the painter's information, and then working with the relationship, the paintings relationship of that artist, and showing all of the paintings for that artist, showing all the painters from France. And now I'm looping over the painter and painters and finding out how many, using the length of their paintings, seeing how many paintings each painter has. So let's run Populate and get some things into the database. And there's the result of some queries. So the second painter was Georges Seurat. There's paintings. Here are my painters from France. And then here are the number of works in the database for all of my various artists. Okay. So now move over to the Flask part. So I'm going to have routes and form. Oh, well, here's the database at this stage. I have installed the extension to view SQLite. So I'm going to go here to the settings, command palette, SQL, and view this artist database, and it comes down here in this SQL Explorer, sort of hidden down at the bottom. And here are my painters. Hit that arrow, and And I am not finding things. Oh, it's this. I have this vestige of the one I think I killed. And here's the one. Sorry. So I seem to have two ArtDBs. And so it's this. I need to clean up a little bit better. This is the second one is the. So I need to do a drop to clean this one out. But here is the one that we just made. Okay. Now, on to the Flask part. So I have routes and form. So let me start with the form. I am bringing in Flask form. I'm going to have a submit. I'm basically a button. I'm going to have a string field. Everything's, in this case, I'm adding the artist. So I'm adding, we will another time add a painting. That will be slightly trickier just because we will have to make sure that the paintings painter ID exists. But for the painter, sort of, I don't know, maybe more the parent class here, it's just a matter of a bunch of string fields, text fields to text inputs in HTML to just enter all the information. I have a little bit of validation, not much. So I'm saying I have a last name, which is a string field. This is the label last name. I'm going to say you must have one, and it should be more than 2 and less than 60. First name, same. Country, pretty much the same. Birth date, death date, and a submit button. So I didn't do any validating on the birth date and the death date. And as I've said previously, with these artists are from like the 1800s. And so I'm not working with a database date type because those dates are sort of too old for the date type. Often the first date, the zero date is often sometimes in the 1970s or maybe 1900, but it rarely goes back into the 1800s. So we're just going to keep it a simple string. But this is the form. So we're expecting text fields to enter the last name, first name, country, birthday, death date. If I do something really bad, first name, last name, it will yell at me with these validations. Okay, then the routes, and there'll only be, so again, bringing in the database, because when the information comes from the form to this Python, to the routing page, then I will do an insert. And so this route needs to know about the database. The form didn't need to know about the database. The form just needs to know what kind of things I'm going to have, what kind of data things I'm going to have, string fields and a submit button. But this is where the inserting is going to happen. So it needs to know about the database. So import app art define, and I'm again calling it my_db. And since I'm interacting with the database, I need a session. And I'm bringing in my forms art from import artist form. So this was the definition of what I have on my form, and I'm bringing and this was the name. This was the name of the file. This was the name of the class, then extended Flask form. And then my normal Flask imports, like request, get something from the form, a redirect. I usually have a default route that I send over to the form. My secret key. Here's my default route being redirected to my artist form. Here's my artist form. I am making one of these artist forms. If the data comes over and it's valid, then I am going to create a painter. So I'm getting all of my request, all the stuff from the form. And then I'm going to create a new painter with the last name, first name, country, birth date, death date. add that painter, commit that painter, and then I'm moving over to a form handler that will say, there it is. I inserted that artist. And if it's not valid, so if I'm not submitting or if it's not valid, then I'll go over to the form to be ready to enter. And so then I should be ready. So I've told you about the form file and the routes file. So then I should the templates. I have my artist form, which just says I'm going to have a last name, first name, country, birthday, death date, and a submit button. And then the handler just is spitting out the result. So I'm not doing anything with the database inserted, but this is just result. So this is just whatever the user typed, which is what I should have put in the database, but this is not directly from database. This is just coming over from the form. And then some shared layout, some little bit of style, and my JSON file, which we showed before when we were populating. Okay, so now I'm ready for the routes. Let's try and run the routes. Control click. Here is my form. Here's some information on Edgar Degas for me to use. So I'm going to enter Degas, Edgar from France. When was his birthday? Forgot how I entered the other ones, but I'll enter, since it's just a string, I'll write it out. July 19, 1834, and death date, September 27, 1917, and insert the artist. And there we are on the handler. And then I should be able to go once again to the command palette and open art database. The SQLite Explorer is down here. I want the second one. I've presumably added Edgar Degas to, yes, and my dates are different than the other ones. So I should have on my form say dates of, dates that look like this to give the user half a chance of doing the right thing. But there we have it. So we've combined SQLAlchemy and Flask. That was one thing we did, but we also divvied up. We separated the definition from the population. I put the population and some queries together, but I could have had another separation of queries. And then I had a forms Python and a routes Python. And some of these need to know about session, and some of these need to know about the database. So there's all this various importing to inform each other about what's what. But the nice thing here is to separate the population from the routes. So I'm not running, I have code to do the populating, but I run it sort of once and only once. So now I can run the routes as much as I want and add as many artists as I want without overwriting the artists that already exist, without rerunning this populating code, without having to delete my database and sort of start all over again. And that's what I wanted to show you. Next time, we'll add paintings and make sure that the paintings have good structure and that they have an artist. So we will have to create an artist. So I will have to add some probably Edgar Degas paintings in next time around. Thanks for your attention.